Lori Tackett. On January 11, 1992, in rural Indiana, a group of 4 teenage girls committed one of the most disturbing crimes in the state's history. Among them was 17-year-old Lori Tackett, who would play a central role in what happened to 12-year-old Shanda Sharer that night. The events that unfolded over several hours left investigators and the public struggling to comprehend how teenagers could carry out such prolonged brutality against someone they barely knew. The group abducted Shanda from her father's home in Jeffersonville under false pretenses. Melinda Loveless, who was 16 at the time, had orchestrated the plan out of jealousy. Shanda had been dating her ex-girlfriend, Amanda Heverin. Tackett provided the vehicle and drove the group to a remote location known locally as the Witch's Castle. What happened at that location was prolonged and methodical. The group bound Shanda and subjected her to hours of physical assault. Tackett participated actively and at one point taunted their victim with words that would later be repeated in court proceedings. She told Shanda that the location was filled with human remains and that hers would be next. Tackett had a troubled background that would emerge during her legal proceedings. She had been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and had experienced hallucinations since childhood. Her mother, a strict religious figure, had once attempted to strangle her after discovering her changing clothes at school. Tackett had developed a fascination with the occult and sometimes pretended to be possessed by an entity she called Deanna the Vampire. In early 1991, Tackett had been hospitalized after incidents of self-harm. She was prescribed antidepressants and discharged in April of that year. By September, she had dropped out of high school. When she met Melinda Loveless later that year, she found someone who shared her capacity for darkness. After the assault at the Witch's Castle, the group placed Shanda in the trunk of Tackett's car. They stopped at Tackett's home to clean up, then drove to a remote field near Madison. Shanda was still alive when they doused her with gasoline and set her on fire. The group returned later to add more fuel. The crime was solved quickly. 2 of the participants, Hope Rippey and Tony Lawrence, confessed to authorities that same evening. Shanda's burned remains were discovered by hunters and identified through dental records. Evidence in Tackett's car trunk confirmed her involvement. All 4 girls pleaded guilty to avoid trial and the possibility of the death penalty. Tackett admitted to murder, criminal confinement, and arson. In 1993, she was sentenced to 60 years at the Indiana Women's Prison. Tackett was released on January 11, 2018, the 26th anniversary of when Shanda's body was discovered. She had served 26 years and was released for good behavior. She completed 1 year of supervised release and now maintains a low profile in Madison, Indiana. Shanda's mother, Jacques Vaught, later reflected on the tragedy, stating, "If you don't let good things come from bad things, nothing gets better." The case remains one of the most studied examples of juvenile perpetrators committing extreme acts. Melinda Loveless, who had orchestrated the plan, later expressed the mindset that drove them that night. She said she couldn't wait to carry out what they did to Shanda. The statement revealed the premeditation that went into the crime. This was not an impulsive act, but something Loveless had anticipated with eagerness. The 4 perpetrators received different sentences based on their levels of involvement. Tackett's 60-year sentence reflected her active participation throughout the night. The case has been the subject of multiple books and documentaries, examining how teenagers could commit such acts against someone they barely knew. The next case would involve a standoff with law enforcement that lasted over 30 minutes. Nicole Jackson. In June 2021, in Volusia County, Florida, deputies responded to a burglary call at a residence. What they encountered was not a typical break-in. They found themselves in an armed confrontation with two juveniles who had barricaded themselves inside the home with an arsenal of stolen weapons. Nicole Jackson was 14 years old at the time. She and a 12-year-old boy had run away from a group home and broken into the residence, where they discovered multiple firearms, including an AK-47, a shotgun, and several handguns. When deputies arrived, the juveniles did not surrender. They opened fire. The shootout lasted more than 30 minutes. Deputies took cover as rounds from the AK-47 and other weapons struck around them. Body cam footage captured Nicole's voice during the incident, and her words revealed her mindset in that moment. "I'm gonna kill you all." This was what Nicole reportedly shouted at the deputies who were trying to end the situation without casualties. The statement demonstrated that despite her age, she understood the gravity of what she was doing and had lethal intent. The circumstances that led Nicole to that house remain partially unclear. She had been placed in a group home, and her decision to run away suggests instability in her living situation. Details about her family background and what led to her placement in the group home have not been extensively documented in public records. What is clear is that when she gained access to weapons, she was willing to use them against law enforcement officers. The extended duration of the shootout indicated that she was not acting impulsively, but was committed to the confrontation. Deputies exercised restraint, ultimately ending the situation without anyone losing their life. Nicole was charged with attempted first-degree murder of law enforcement officers, along with burglary and criminal mischief. The decision to charge her as an adult reflected the severity of her actions and the potential consequences had her aim been better or the deputies less fortunate. Prosecutors argued that her willingness to engage in a prolonged gunfight with law enforcement demonstrated a level of danger that warranted adult prosecution. The legal proceedings moved through the Florida court system over the following 2 years. In 2023, Nicole pleaded no contest to the charges. The plea acknowledged her responsibility while avoiding a full trial that could have resulted in an even longer sentence. Nicole was sentenced to 20 years in prison, with credit for time already served. She remains incarcerated in a Florida correctional facility as of 2025. No deputies were harmed in the incident, though the psychological impact of being fired upon by a teenager with military-grade weapons has likely stayed with those who responded that day. The case raised questions about how a 14-year-old could access such an arsenal of weapons and make the decision to use them against law enforcement. The group home system that was supposed to protect Nicole instead became a situation she felt compelled to escape from, leading her to a confrontation that will cost her decades of freedom. The next case would involve two young lovers with military aspirations and a deadly secret. Diane Michelle Zamora. Diane Michelle Zamora was born on January 21, 1978, in Crowley, Texas. She was an honor student at Crowley High School, with dreams of becoming an astronaut. When she was 14, she met David Graham through the Civil Air Patrol, and they began a relationship that would define both their lives in ways neither could have anticipated. On December 4, 1995, 16-year-old Adrienne Jones was found dead near Joe Pool Lake in Grand Prairie, Texas. She had been beaten with a dumbbell and shot twice, including once execution style. The investigation would eventually reveal that her killers were two honor students with promising futures, including Diane Michelle Zamora, who was 18 years old at the time, and had just been accepted to the United States Naval Academy, one of the most prestigious military institutions in the country. Zamora and her fiancé, David Graham, had planned the murder together. Graham, who had aspirations of becoming a military pilot, had confessed to Zamora that he had been intimate with Adrienne. Rather than end the relationship or work through the betrayal, Zamora's response was to demand that Adrienne pay with her life. The obsessive nature of their relationship meant that any perceived threat had to be eliminated. The night of the murder, Graham lured Adrian into a car under the pretense of a date. Zamora hid in the back seat, waiting. When the moment came, she attacked Adrian with a dumbbell, striking her repeatedly. Then she gave Graham an order that would seal both their fates. "Kill her! Kill her!" These were the words Zamora shouted at Graham as Adrian lay injured. Graham complied, shooting Adrian twice with a 9mm handgun. One shot was to the head, execution style. They dumped her body near the lake and drove away, believing they had eliminated the threat to their relationship. Zamora had met Graham when she was 14 through the Civil Air Patrol. Both were high achievers with dreams of military careers. She wanted to be an astronaut. He wanted to be a pilot. They became engaged and planned a future together. But beneath the surface of their accomplishments was an obsessive relationship that could turn lethal when threatened. The murder remained unsolved for months. The breakthrough came when Zamora confessed to roommates at the Naval Academy. The roommates reported what they had heard to authorities, and both Zamora and Graham were arrested in 1996. The investigation uncovered physical evidence connecting them to the crime. Blood was found in Graham's car, and the 9mm handgun was discovered in his attic. The forensic evidence, combined with Zamora's confession to her roommates, built a strong case against both defendants. The trial in 1998 attracted significant media attention. Two promising young people with military academy appointments had committed a brutal murder over jealousy. The contrast between their accomplished public images and the brutality of their crime fascinated the public. The jury found Zamora guilty of capital murder after hearing testimony about the planning and execution of the attack. Zamora was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. Graham received the same sentence. The two young people who had planned to build careers in the military instead found themselves facing decades behind bars for a crime driven by obsessive jealousy. In 2007, Zamora participated in a Dateline interview that included a polygraph examination. She failed on questions related to her intent, though she claimed the results were affected by countermeasures. The interview provided no new evidence that might help her case. As of 2025, Zamora remains incarcerated at the Dr. Lane Murray Unit in Gatesville, Texas, in protective custody. Her parole eligibility will come around 2035, and she will have the opportunity to argue for release at that time. What happens when someone decides to slowly poison the person caring for them? Christina Adkins. In 2006, in Michigan, 53-year-old Virginia Bentley began experiencing mysterious health problems that baffled her family. She did not know that her 13-year-old granddaughter, Christina Adkins, who lived with her and depended on her care, was the cause of her suffering. Christina had been lacing her grandmother's medication with morphine, keeping her sick while planning something more permanent. The poisoning was gradual and deliberate. Christina administered doses that made Virginia ill without immediately killing her. The pattern continued until Christina finally gave her grandmother a fatal dose. Virginia Bentley died from morphine overdose, and initially no one suspected her teenage granddaughter. The investigation eventually focused on Christina when inconsistencies in the circumstances of Virginia's death raised questions among investigators. Toxicology confirmed the presence of morphine at lethal levels. The source was traced back to medications in the household, and Christina emerged as the only person with both the opportunity and the access to carry out such a plan. The motive behind the poisoning has never been clearly established. Christina had experienced mental health issues and had reportedly been subjected to mistreatment. There were conflicts in the household related to her homeschooling situation, but nothing adequately explained why she chose to end her grandmother's life through slow poisoning. Christina was charged as an adult due to the premeditated nature of the crime. The gradual poisoning demonstrated planning and awareness of what she was doing. This was not an impulsive act, but a calculated campaign that unfolded over days. The court proceedings took place in 2008 when Christina was 16. She pleaded guilty to second-degree murder, acknowledging her role in her grandmother's death. The guilty plea spared the family a trial, but did not diminish the severity of the sentence. During the proceedings, Christina addressed the court. "I really am sorry. I took someone I loved." These were her words as she expressed what she characterized as remorse. Whether the apology was genuine or calculated remained a question for those who heard it. Virginia's husband, Christina's step-grandfather, also spoke. His words captured the devastation the family had experienced. "You took her life. You took mine." The statement reflected how the loss of Virginia had destroyed not just one life, but damaged everyone connected to her. Christina was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. As of 2025, she remains incarcerated in a Michigan correctional facility. Her parole eligibility will come around 2026, and she will have the opportunity to argue that she has been rehabilitated during her years of incarceration. The case raised questions about how someone so young could carry out such a calculated act against a family member who was caring for her. Virginia Bentley had taken her granddaughter into her home, and Christina repaid that care with betrayal. The slow poisoning method demonstrated a level of planning that contradicted any claim of impulsive behavior. The next case would involve a young woman whose conviction was eventually overturned. Charlie K. Ely. In April 2011, in Summerfield, Florida, 15-year-old Seath Jackson was lured to a residence where a group of people were waiting for him. What followed was a coordinated attack that ended with Seath being beaten, shot, and his remains burned to conceal the evidence. Among those charged was 18-year-old Charlie K. Ely, whose role in the crime would be debated for years in courts and appeals. The group that attacked Seath included multiple participants with different levels of involvement. The primary aggressor was Michael Bargo, who had a dispute with Seath over a previous relationship. Others participated in the physical assault and the disposal of the body afterward. Charlie's alleged role was luring Seath to the location where he would meet his death, making her an accessory rather than a direct participant in the attack itself. The investigation moved quickly. Co-defendants provided statements that implicated everyone involved, and arrests followed. Charlie was charged with first-degree murder along with the others, despite her role being less direct than those who actually carried out the attack. Charlie had her own struggles before the incident. She had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, depression, and anxiety, and had stopped taking her medications. Her mental health history would become relevant in later legal proceedings, raising questions about her capacity and culpability. In 2011, Charlie was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. The verdict treated her as equally responsible as those who had physically attacked Seath, despite the differences in their actions that night. The conviction stood for nearly a decade. Then, in 2020, Charlie's legal team succeeded in having her sentence vacated. The court found that she had received ineffective assistance of counsel during her original trial. Her attorney argued that there was little evidence directly connecting Charlie to the murder beyond the statements of co-defendants who had their own reasons to minimize their roles. The defense contended that she had not actually lured Seath and that her presence at the scene did not make her a murderer. Rather than face a new trial, Charlie pleaded to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 years. With credit for time already served, she was released. As of 2025, Charlie K. Ely is free and maintains a low profile in Florida. The case highlighted how different participants in a group crime can receive vastly different outcomes depending on legal representation and how evidence is presented. Charlie went from facing life in prison to walking free within the span of a few years. Seth Jackson's family had to endure the original trial, the appeals, and then the reduced sentence for one of the people convicted in his death. The justice system's reconsideration of Charlie's case did not bring their loved one back or provide the closure that a final, unchanging verdict might have offered. Michael Bargo, the primary aggressor in the attack, remains on death row for his role in Seth's murder. The contrast between his fate and Charlie's release illustrates how the same crime can result in dramatically different outcomes for different participants. The next case would involve a teenager who claimed self-defense after shooting her mother's fiancé, Sunshine Grace James. In August 2023, in a Pensacola, Florida apartment, 15-year-old Sunshine Grace James shot and killed Christopher Moore while he and her mother, Alexis Pineda, slept in their bedroom. She also shot her mother, who survived the attack. The events of that night and the circumstances leading up to them would become the subject of intense legal scrutiny over the following 2 years. Sunshine claimed that she had acted in self-defense. According to her account, Moore had been harming her, and she felt she had no other option. The self-defense claim suggested that the shooting was a desperate act by a teenager protecting herself from an immediate threat. However, the evidence suggested something different. Both Moore and Pineda were asleep when the shooting occurred. An ambush of sleeping victims is inconsistent with self-defense, which typically requires an imminent threat at the moment of the act. Prosecutors argued that Sunshine had planned and executed the attack rather than responding to immediate danger. Before the shooting, Sunshine reportedly spoke words that would later be used against her claim of spontaneous self-defense. "Mama, I love y'all." This statement, made before she opened fire, suggested awareness of what she was about to do, rather than a panicked reaction to being harmed. Christopher Moore was 35 years old at the time of his death. He had been engaged to Sunshine's mother, making him a significant presence in the household for some time. Whatever conflicts existed in that home, they culminated in Sunshine deciding that lethal force was her solution to whatever problems she believed she faced. Sunshine was arrested after fleeing the scene. The investigation collected physical evidence, including gunshot wound analysis and blood evidence that reconstructed the sequence of events. The forensic findings contradicted the self-defense narrative. The case proceeded through the Florida court system over the following 2 years. In September 2025, Sunshine pleaded no contest to second-degree murder. The plea acknowledged criminal responsibility without admitting the specific facts alleged by prosecutors. Sunshine faces sentencing in January 2026. The minimum sentence will be 25 years, with the possibility of life imprisonment. She remains in custody awaiting the sentencing hearing that will determine how much of her life she will spend incarcerated. Her mother, Alexis Pineda, survived the shooting, but lost her fiancé to her own daughter's actions. The family that existed before August 2023 was destroyed that night. Regardless of what circumstances led Sunshine to pick up the weapon and pull the trigger, the case will be closely watched when sentencing occurs in January 2026. The judge will have to weigh Sunshine's youth against the calculated nature of the attack and the fact that both victims were defenseless when she opened fire. Whatever the sentence, Sunshine will spend a significant portion of her adult life incarcerated for what she did that night in Pensacola. If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The next case would involve a hidden pregnancy and a desperate act that shocked a small Nebraska community. Chloe Coplin Anderson. In November 2023, in a bedroom in Nebraska, 16-year-old Chloe Coplin Anderson gave birth in secret. She had concealed her pregnancy from everyone around her, and when the moment came, she was alone. What happened next would result in one of the most serious sentences given to a juvenile in Nebraska in recent years. Chloe took the life of her newborn son shortly after giving birth. She used a kitchen knife to end the infant's life, then attempted to hide what she had done. The concealment was unsuccessful. Her parents discovered what had happened and contacted authorities. The investigation revealed the circumstances surrounding the pregnancy. Chloe had become pregnant at 15 by a 19-year-old male, which under Nebraska law constituted a separate offense. The pregnancy was the result of conduct that the legal system classified differently than a relationship between peers. Chloe had hidden her condition throughout, telling no one and seeking no medical care. Forensic examination of the scene found evidence consistent with Chloe's actions. The knife used was recovered from her closet, still bearing traces of what had occurred. The physical evidence left no question about what had happened in that bedroom. Chloe's background emerged during the legal proceedings. She had experienced mistreatment from family members, and no adults had intervened to help her. The trauma she carried manifested in diagnosed PTSD and major depression. Her defense team argued that these factors contributed to her state of mind during the pregnancy and afterward. Her attorney made a statement that captured the defense's position. No adults stepped in to help. The argument was that Chloe had been failed by the people who should have protected her, leaving her to face an impossible situation alone. Whether this context excused or merely explained her actions remained for the court to determine. Chloe pleaded no contest to second-degree murder in 2024. The plea acknowledged her responsibility without requiring a full trial that would have exposed every detail of what happened that night. The sentencing hearing would determine how much of her life she would spend incarcerated. On April 24, 2025, Chloe was sentenced to 35 to 60 years in prison. The sentence means she will be at least 51 years old before she has any possibility of release. A teenager who had been failed by the adults around her will spend decades in a Nebraska correctional facility. The case raised difficult questions about how society handles pregnant teenagers in crisis, particularly those who have experienced trauma. Chloe made a choice that cannot be undone. But the circumstances that led to that choice involved failures at multiple levels. Her newborn son, who never had a chance at life, was the ultimate victim of a situation that spiraled beyond anyone's control. The 19-year-old male responsible for the pregnancy faced separate charges under Nebraska's statutory laws. Chloe's case highlighted the intersection of multiple systems: child welfare, health care, and criminal justice, all of which failed to identify a teenager in desperate need of help before tragedy occurred. The next case would involve a young refugee struggling to adjust to life in a new country. Sophia Koval. In May 2024, in Broward County, Florida, 14-year-old Sophia Koval fatally attacked her 79-year-old grandmother, Yevgenia, in their home. The method was blunt and direct. Sophia used a walker and a belt to inflict the injuries that ended her grandmother's life. The case would expose the struggles of a family displaced by war and a teenager who had fallen through the cracks of multiple systems. Sophia and her family had fled Ukraine after the Russian invasion disrupted their lives. The war had torn Sophia from her school, her friends, and everything familiar. When they arrived in the United States, Sophia struggled to adjust to her new reality. Her mother worked abroad to support the family, leaving Sophia often alone with her grandmother. Yevgenia had been a kindergarten teacher in Ukraine and a cancer survivor. She had dedicated her life to caring for young people, and in her final years, she was caring for her granddaughter. The relationship between grandmother and granddaughter had become strained as Sophia's behavioral issues intensified. Sophia's father, Vladimir, had sought psychiatric help for his daughter but found it unaffordable. Sophia had shown signs of distress, difficulty sleeping, behavioral problems at school, reports of being bullied. She made claims about experiencing harm that her father dismissed as creating drama. Whether those claims were true or cries for attention, they signaled a teenager in crisis. The incident on May 23, 2024, occurred after Yevgenia took Sophia's phone away. The confrontation escalated into a fatal attack. Sophia used objects at hand, a walker, a belt, to strike her grandmother repeatedly. Yevgenia did not survive the assault. Vladimir's reaction to his daughter's actions revealed the impossible position the family found itself in. In his victim impact statement, he spoke of grief that would stay with him until the end of his life. But he also expressed that he still loved his daughter and hoped she could eventually find forgiveness. A father had lost his mother at the hands of his daughter. Sophia pleaded no contest to manslaughter in October 2024. The charge reflected her age and the circumstances surrounding the incident. Rather than adult prosecution, she would face juvenile consequences. Sophia was sentenced to a 3-year maximum risk juvenile program, with release to supervision until age 21. The sentence prioritized rehabilitation over punishment, recognizing that Sophia was a product of trauma and displacement as much as personal choice. As of 2025, she remains in a Florida maximum risk juvenile facility. The Koval case illustrated how war's devastation extends far beyond the battlefield. A family fled one form of destruction only to be torn apart by another. Yevgenia survived cancer and war, but did not survive the struggles of her own granddaughter. The case also raised questions about mental health services for refugee families and the hidden costs of displacement. Sophia needed help that the family could not afford and the system did not provide. Her grandmother paid the ultimate price for those failures, even as Sophia now receives the treatment she needed all along through the juvenile justice system. The next case would involve a teenager who struck back against those she said had harmed her for years. Ashley Martinson. On March 7, 2015, in Rhinelander, Wisconsin, 17-year-old Ashley Martinson shot her stepfather, Thomas Ayers, and stabbed her mother, Jennifer Ayers. Both parents died from their injuries. Ashley then locked her younger siblings in a closet before fleeing the state. What followed was a case that forced the legal system to grapple with claims of long-term mistreatment and a violent response to that mistreatment. Ashley had endured years of mistreatment in her household. Thomas Ayers, her stepfather, had prior convictions for serious offenses, including kidnapping. Ashley claimed that both Thomas and a previous boyfriend of her mother's had subjected her to physical and other forms of harm over extended periods. Her mother, Jennifer, according to Ashley, had failed to protect her. The circumstances leading to March 7th involved an escalating conflict. Ashley had been told she could not see her boyfriend, and her privileges were revoked. This confrontation became the breaking point after years of alleged mistreatment. Ashley retrieved a shotgun and attacked Thomas first, shooting him in the neck and head. She then turned on her mother, stabbing Jennifer multiple times. Evidence of Ashley's state of mind existed before the incident. She had posted on social media, "I want to kill him so fucking bad," a statement that prosecutors used to argue premeditation. The defense countered that the post reflected the desperation of someone trapped in an unbearable situation, rather than a calculated plan. Ashley had been diagnosed with PTSD and depression, stemming from the mistreatment she described. Mental health professionals who evaluated her found evidence consistent with someone who had experienced prolonged trauma. The question became whether that trauma explained or excused what she did on March 7th. After the incident, Ashley fled to Indiana, where she was apprehended. She initially claimed self-defense, but later acknowledged her actions. Her account shifted as investigators pressed for details, ultimately settling on an admission that she had intended to end her own life, but decided Thomas deserved what happened more than she deserved to die. Ashley pleaded guilty to 2 counts of second-degree intentional homicide. The plea avoided a trial that would have required her siblings to testify about what they witnessed and heard that night. The court accepted her guilty plea and moved to sentencing. In 2016, Ashley was sentenced to 23 years in prison plus extended supervision. Appeals challenging the sentence were denied in 2019. As of 2025, Ashley remains incarcerated at Taycheedah Correctional Institution in Wisconsin. In interviews from prison, Ashley has said she feels happy and safe for the first time in her life, a statement that speaks to the environment she escaped as much as the one she now inhabits. She has earned her high school diploma while incarcerated and continues serving her sentence. The case forced Wisconsin courts to weigh claims of prolonged mistreatment against the reality of 2 people dead. Thomas Ayers, despite his criminal history, and Jennifer Ayers, despite her alleged failures as a mother, did not deserve to die. But the circumstances that created Ashley's desperation did not appear from nowhere. The question of how much context matters when judging a crime has no easy answer. The next case would involve identical twins who turned on their own mother. Jasmia and Tasmia Whitehead. On January 13, 2010, in Conyers, Georgia, 34-year-old Nikki Whitehead was found dead in the home she shared with her 16-year-old twin daughters, Jasmia and Tasmia. She had been beaten and stabbed in the bathroom. The twins told investigators they had discovered their mother's body, portraying themselves as grieving daughters. It would take years before the truth emerged. The Whitehead twins had a complicated history with their mother. They had been raised primarily by their great-grandmother, Della Frazier, and had been honor students and Girl Scouts. When Nikki regained custody just days before her death, the twins protested. The transition back to their mother's household created immediate conflict. The relationship between Nikki and her daughters had been marked by disputes over control and discipline. The twins viewed their mother as hypocritical and overly strict. Physical confrontations had occurred before, and the family had been through counseling and juvenile court proceedings. The situation was volatile when the twins moved back in with Nikki. The investigation initially treated the twins as witnesses rather than suspects. But forensic evidence told a different story. Bite marks found on Nikki's body were analyzed and matched to the twins. DNA evidence excluded Nikki's boyfriend, who had initially been considered a suspect. The physical evidence pointed directly at Jasmia and Tasmia. For years, the twins maintained their innocence while the case remained open. Then, in 2014, both sisters confessed to their roles in their mother's death. They described a confrontation in the bathroom that escalated into a fatal attack. One twin had beaten Nikki with a vise, while the other stabbed her. They had worked together to end their mother's life. The confessions came as part of plea negotiations. Both Jasmia and Tasmia pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. The reduced charge acknowledged that the incident, while fatal, may have occurred in the heat of passion rather than through cold premeditation. The plea spared both twins from potential life sentences. Each twin was sentenced to 30 years in prison. They have been incarcerated separately, Tasmia at Arundel State Prison and Jasmia at Pulaski State Prison in Georgia. The separation ensures they cannot coordinate stories or influence each other's behavior while incarcerated. As of June 2025, Tasmia is eligible for parole in March 2026, and Jasmia in September 2027. After more than 15 years of incarceration, the twins may soon have the opportunity to argue for release. Nikki Whitehead's family will have the chance to speak at those hearings about the daughter and sister they lost. The Whitehead case became one of the most studied examples of sibling co-defendants in a family homicide. The dynamics between the twins, how they influenced each other, whether one was more culpable than the other, and how they coordinated their actions, raised questions that forensic psychologists continue to examine. Their separate incarcerations were designed to prevent them from maintaining the bond that had led to their mother's death. The next case dates back decades and involved crimes so disturbing they changed how England approached juvenile offenders. Mary Bell. In 1968, in the Scotswood area of Newcastle upon Tyne, England, two young boys were found dead within months of each other. Martin Brown was 4 years old when he was discovered in May. Brian Howe was 3 years old when he was found in July. Both had been strangled. The investigation would eventually focus on an 11-year-old girl named Mary Bell, whose actions shocked a nation and raised fundamental questions about criminal responsibility in children. Mary had experienced severe mistreatment from her earliest days. Her mother, Betty, who was 17 when Mary was born, allegedly shouted, "Take the thing away," after delivery. As a toddler, Mary experienced multiple accidents that family members suspected were deliberate attempts on her life, including being dropped from a window and given sleeping pills. Betty worked as a prostitute and allegedly allowed clients to harm Mary during her childhood. The environment Mary grew up in was marked by poverty, neglect, and exposure to conduct no child should witness. Psychological evaluations later identified psychopathic personality traits and developmental issues linked to both genetic and environmental factors. Mary's grasp of the difference between fantasy and reality was impaired by what she had experienced. Mary strangled Martin Brown on May 25, 1968. The death was initially considered accidental. Then, on July 31st, Brian Howe was found dead with additional injuries beyond strangulation, puncture marks on his body and an M carved into his skin. The escalation suggested someone who was testing boundaries and enjoying the results. The investigation focused on Mary and a 13-year-old accomplice, Norma Bell, who was not related to Mary. Forensic evidence, including fibers from Mary's clothing, connected her to Brian's death. Under questioning, Mary's responses revealed knowledge only the perpetrator would have. When charged, her reaction was chilling. "That's all right by me." This was Mary's response when informed of the charges against her. The casual acceptance of being accused of taking two young lives demonstrated either a lack of understanding or a lack of concern that disturbed everyone involved in the case. Mary was convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Her age and psychological state precluded a murder conviction. She was sentenced to indefinite detention, to be held until authorities determined she was safe to release. Mary was released in 1980 at age 23. She was given a new identity to protect her from potential retaliation. In 2003, a court order extended lifelong anonymity to her daughter and granddaughter as well. As of 2025, Mary Bell's whereabouts remain unknown and protected by law. In 1998, Mary participated in interviews for a book titled Cries Unheard. She reflected on her actions. "I didn't know I had intended for them to be dead forever." The statement captured the disconnect that had allowed an 11-year-old to take two lives without fully grasping the permanence of death. The Mary Bell case transformed how the British legal system approached juvenile offenders. Her case demonstrated that children were capable of acts previously thought to be beyond their comprehension. and that the circumstances of a child's upbringing could create the conditions for such acts. The lifelong anonymity granted to her acknowledged both the severity of her crimes and the possibility of rehabilitation over decades. Martin Brown and Brian Howe were remembered by their families long after Mary Bell disappeared into a new identity. The two young boys who became her victims never had the chance to grow up, while their killer was eventually given the opportunity to build a life under a different name. The final case would involve the only woman currently on death row in Tennessee, Krista Gale Pike. On January 12, 1995, in Knoxville, Tennessee, 18-year-old Krista Gale Pike and two accomplices lured 19-year-old Colleen Slemmer to a remote area near a Job Corps facility. What followed was one of the most brutal crimes in Tennessee history. An extended attack that included torture, mutilation, and the keeping of a trophy from the victim's body. Krista's childhood had been marked by instability and neglect. Her parents had tumultuous marriages filled with infidelity and conflict. Her paternal grandmother, who Krista later described as the only person who ever loved her, died in 1988. Krista attempted suicide multiple times, starting in elementary school, and spent time in psychiatric treatment and juvenile facilities. By the time she arrived at the Knoxville Job Corps Center, Krista had developed an interest in the occult and formed a relationship with a fellow student named Tatterell Shipp. The motive for attacking Colleen was jealousy. Krista believed Colleen was interested in Tatterell. What should have been teenage rivalry instead became something far darker. Krista and her accomplices attacked Colleen with a box cutter and a meat cleaver. They carved a pentagram into her chest. When Colleen was still alive, they smashed her skull with a chunk of asphalt. The attack continued even after death was certain. Krista kept a piece of Colleen's skull as a souvenir, later showing it to other students at the Job Corps facility. The investigation moved quickly once Krista began displaying her trophy. Her willingness to show others what she had done led directly to her arrest. The physical evidence, combined with her own statements, left no doubt about her involvement. When questioned about the attack, Krista offered an explanation. "We were merely trying to scare her. It got out of control." The statement was contradicted by the extended nature of the attack and the deliberate mutilation of Colleen's body. This was not an incident that got out of control. It was sustained brutality. Krista was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. She became the youngest woman sentenced to death in the modern era of capital punishment in the United States. Her co-defendant, Tatterell Shipp, received life in prison, while the third accomplice received a lesser sentence for her role. For nearly 30 years, Krista has remained on death row, pursuing appeals and attempting to have her sentence reduced. In 2023, an appeal based on her juvenile status was denied. The courts have consistently upheld both her conviction and her sentence. In late 2025, Tennessee issued an execution warrant for Krista Pike. Her execution is scheduled for September 30th, 2026. If carried out, she will be the first woman executed in Tennessee in over 200 years. Krista currently resides at the Deborah K. Johnson Rehabilitation Center in Nashville, awaiting either a successful appeal or the execution date that has finally been set after 3 decades. Colleen Slemmer's family has waited just as long for the justice system to complete what began when their daughter was taken from them in 1995. The Pike case remains one of the most disturbing in Tennessee criminal history. The combination of premeditation, extended torture, occult symbolism, and trophy-keeping placed it in a category of severity that has kept Krista on death row for nearly 30 years. While other juvenile offenders have had their sentences reconsidered in light of evolving standards, Krista's case has withstood every challenge. Colleen Slemmer was 19 years old when she died, barely an adult, with her entire life ahead of her. She went to meet people she thought were her friends, and instead encountered something beyond comprehension. Her final moments were spent in terror and pain, while someone who claimed to have no intention of causing permanent harm carved a pentagram into her chest and crushed her skull with a piece of asphalt. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.